Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Clements. I believe the bio says that I work for Clements Consulting, which is, of course, just me. And while that's technically still open for business, I'm currently teaching computer science at a local university, specifically an intro class and a technology ethics class. But this talk was inspired by my time working in an OSPO. I was managing compliance projects, spooling up a new program. So I was working for Analog Devices Incorporated. That's when I submitted the paper. They were supportive and said, they'd send me. Specifically, Mr. Steve Kilbane was fantastically inspirational as he taught me during my first open source job. I currently work for the University of Mary Washington. They're in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And when they picked me up this year, they said, yeah, sure, we'll send you. So I'm also very grateful to them. So for good context, I think I ended up on the DevOps track because you had the keywords shifting left, which is probably something you've heard a lot about in DevOps. As a former project manager and program manager, you can't shift everything left, right? Otherwise you're doing everything all at once, and that doesn't work. For context, compliance is more of an ongoing process. There are some key activities that I want to focus on that you should start with to initiate that process, and you want to keep them in mind throughout your development processes. So organizations as a whole exist to derive value from resources, right? You have stakeholders. It doesn't matter whether you're a company doing commercial ventures or if you're not for profit. You're still turning people's time and money into something of value. That process is generally a risk management process where you are, adjusting the net benefits to an optimum level, right? Like, you get too greedy and you kind of overextend yourself. You don't do it enough and people lose interest, right? This is commonly characterized with the term profit, in the commercial world. But again, the impetus for open source programs is that it's part of the organization's governance, which is established to kind of standardize results, optimize your output to acceptable levels, right? Now, the next tier down is kind of middle management. I'll kind of characterize them as like software development team managers. And they're concerned with shipping stuff on time. These are, project managers with a software development specialty, right? But one of their main concerns is getting stuff out on time, following through with the promises that the organization makes. And so they're probably the most important, they're one of the more important people to hear this message, right? They need to make sure that these activities are resourced properly, that they're part of the cycle, and that they are done throughout the development cycle of a product. But arguably the most important people are the developers themselves, which I'm sure there's a number of you in the audience. You're there solving problems. You're there beating your head against the keyboard, and oh, thank you. That got a little louder. So you're there, beating your head against the keyboard, and sometimes you're not really concerned with a lot of the details, right? You might say, hey, I have this problem. I need to fix it. Cool, install this thing, done, moving on. And you may not even take the time to look at the license or understand how that license interacts with what your organization's mission is. So when an organization gets started, they'll usually go with compliance. And this is kind of a natural starting point since most people don't really even know how much open source they're using. If they even know they're using open source, they definitely don't know how much, and they don't know which components and to what extent. And that's mostly because even if you are tracking it, you've got like the first level, like sure, we've got Django as a dependency in our pip repo, but all of the things that get installed alongside it are also important as well. So compliance, typically byproducts of the compliance process is that you start building an inventory, you start building your software bills of material, which we heard about in the previous talk. These are just a listing and an inventory, something searchable that you can create metrics on to illustrate your open source consumption. And also, this is going to support lots of important security processes. As soon as a 0-day pops and somebody says, hey, are we using this version of log4j shell, right? This is where the real value can come from these early compliance practices. So it's really important to begin with these ends in mind. An effective compliance process supports the issuing of a license at the end of the development cycle, right? You don't want to burn that extra time waiting for legal personnel or licensing personnel to say, yes, you can ship it, it's, you're approved, even if it's a standard license, you want to be able to understand that if those components conflict with that license at all or introduce any kind of risk into your products. So this is when we usually start talking about an OSPO. Depending on the size of your organization, you may not want a full-size open source program office, dedicated personnel. So they can vary in size, but in general, what you'll end up with is usually some developers that have open source experience. You'll end up with some analysts that are really good at discovering and searching through source code to pull out the licenses and the content there. You'll generally have to have some discussions with legal, whether you have a dedicated intellectual property lawyer or just somebody that is filling those roles. And then, of course, you've got management personnel that are going to set up this process and manage it. In medium or smaller organizations, it'll probably be more ad hoc, but I'll collectively refer to that as like an OSPO. Now, the role is going to be that you need to define the compliance process for your organization, right? Every organization is different, so you've got to take those differences into account. And you'll need to monitor it and improve it, right? You're not going to get it right the first time. Your organization is going to grow and change. The products you're pushing out are going to change. So it's really important that these folks that are involved in this process stay involved and keep on top of it. Communicating with everybody is really important because a lot of people are going to get mad that they're getting their cheese moved, right? Especially if they're waiting until the last minute to come to the OSPO and say, "Hey, I'm pushing my product out. I need a license," and we're going to go, "Cool, show us what's in this thing." And if the answer is I don't know, we're like, "Okay, well then let's start from the beginning," and that's going to burn up some precious time that you might need to do last minute bug fixes, testing, things like that. And then, of course, the OSPO needs to be very approachable and supportive, right? They need to be available and communicative with the stakeholders in the process. That includes informing management about anything that's going on, and also making sure that the developers feel supported and included as part of the process. Now, the OSPO is going to report to management, right? So if you are in this ad hoc team, you're going to report to somebody that says it's okay for you to do these processes, or they're telling you to do these processes. But they're going to work with what I call the development teams, right? The developers that are actually creating the products, fixing the problems, right? So as the developer, the most important thing is that you know what's in your product. It seems like a duh moment, but what the reality thing is that you don't usually start with a green field, right? Like you don't open up your code editor and start creating a project all the time, right? You typically inherit legacy products that were developed by somebody who has been gone for several years. So it's really hard to find this out. So as you get new sets of code, you need to make sure that you're going through it and determining what's in it as best you can. You also might have binaries that you're going to need to track down the source for. Just so you can kind of also figure out what those components are. Now, as you are integrating new dependencies, you need to look at the license of those dependencies before you integrate it, right? The last thing you want to do is bring this stuff into your product and not understand the implications for your software licensing. It's also really important that you remember that there's usually dependencies of dependencies of dependencies, right? Like you install some framework, and sure, you've got one name for it, but your package manager is going to grab this, and then it's going to grab the thing for that, and it's going to grab the thing for that, and before you know it, you've got 4, 5, 6 levels of dependencies that you've got to account for. And you also can't always trust what other people are doing. Part of that is tracking what they're doing. If you get something that's licensed permissively, but they've got some copyleft stuff in it, you may want to double check what you're doing and find something else that does that. It's also important to remember, you're not necessarily asking for permission. You want to make informed decisions, right? You need to present this information to your development team manager and business managers so that they can say, you know what, just do it. It's fine. That's obviously not always ethical, but again, don't see it as asking permission. Think of it as saving yourself some time. if you really start coding against these frameworks, you want to make sure that you're actually allowed to use it. It's also important for you to understand the process. Your OSPO personnel are going to want to talk about this, right? It's their baby, and they care about it. That's why they've gotten involved in the first place. So ask questions. Ask them about what they're doing and why. It's not meant to hinder you. It's meant to help you and keep your process running smoothly. Now, keeping your program sustainable was one of the things that we've had a lot of challenges with, right? We had the development teams coming at the last minute, and then we would tell them, nope, you've been doing it wrong, and they would just get mad and go cry to Dad, and then Dad would come and say, why are you holding up the development teams? And so we want to avoid that. And so the best thing to do is to learn this stuff ahead of time and hang in there. It's worth it. It's important. And I don't think I need to preach to the choir here. We all know that we need to keep doing it. You also need to be aware that you're going to want to integrate some tools. You're going to need some help. Just like we have IDEs and frameworks and things like that, right? Like there are tools that are helping us build software bills of material and getting a handle on our dependencies, but they're also not perfect. I'm sure AI is helping a lot with this as it gets integrated into these tools, but the accuracy of these things is generally pretty low. Depending on the tool, you may see accuracy as low as 30% if all you do is point the tool at your repo and say, tell me what's in it. So you've kind of got to massage it a little bit, like the initial results you can use to get started, but then you're going to have to say, no, it's actually this, and start building your SBOM with a little bit of manual effort. What is nice is that most of these tools keep track of that information, and so as you integrate them into your processes, it will continuously generate your SBOMs, and from there you can actually start automating some of the license decisions or highlighting some of the risks for you. So offload some of that stuff, automate it, make it a little bit easier, but it's definitely something that needs to be monitored as you're going along, right? Especially as you upgrade versions, right? New dependencies might be introduced. And then, of course, there's always the nasty license change that you got to watch out for. And remember that risk tolerance is a business decision. So even if you're a not-for-profit, you can still get sued. You still have money and assets that can be tackled depending on how egregious your violations are. And you also got to remember that there's a lot of corporate goodwill or brand integrity that comes along with doing the right thing. Some companies are shipping to a business source license, and it's not being seen very favorably. So you want to be seen as doing the right thing and trying your best. And there's lots of ways to do this, so you need to figure out what's best for you and then keep iterating on it. Stay on top of it. So if you didn't take anything away from my 15 minutes of fame, the most important thing I'll say is that you need to stay on top of your dependencies. And like I said, that's kind of a duh moment, but it's really important. It's really easy to lose track of. And you want to make these business decisions before you start writing code. That's to save yourself a lot of heartache and optimize your resources a little bit. You definitely want to give this a good effort for the reasons previously stated. We all love open source. We all appreciate the contributions and the work that we all do. And as long as you put the effort into developing a robust process, when things slip through, it's going to be okay. Especially if you catch it quick and you make the corrections, it's gonna go a long way towards smoothing things over with any problems. I'll also say that the folks that get put on the OSPO teams, they have a very specific skill set that a lot of people don't have, and so go easy on them. Depending on how big your organization is, they might be dealing with tons and tons of development teams with different dependencies, different licenses, different concerns. But they're trying really hard, and so go easy on them. They're there to help you, not hinder. So I think that's the end of my 15 minutes. Thank you very much for coming.